Hi, so this is a session that I'm going to be looking at decision making, problem solving. What I often have experienced with clients is that when they are emotionally overloaded and feeling overwhelmed, their decision making process suffers. So, because they're feeling like they've got lots of problems, they're not necessarily able to work through them either individually or even in a way that they feel confident that they're making the right decision. So what I've got is a few little techniques and tools to help you process that. So once you've identified that there is a decision to be made, hopefully these kind of techniques will help you get to an informed decision, a choice at the end that you are actually really happy with. So the first one I'm going to look at, and I'm going to share my screen, and I will make these documents available. Again, there's sort of JPEGs on the YouTube channel. So the first session thing I'm going to look at is the pros and cons, and making weighted decision making. So again, I won't go into great detail because it's there, but the idea is that you physically process each choice and option. So the idea that you will get a sheet of paper, you will identify what the choices are, and this can be quite tricky. So I'll give you an example. So many years ago, we had a really poorly elderly dog, and the problems that the dog was having regarding sort of continence and things like that was becoming problematic because we had small children. So it was a really difficult one. So we sort of did we knew that at some point we were going to have to make the decision of having him put to sleep, but it was a sort of timing issue. So we did a pros and cons list for that. But the pros were for keeping the loyal, 13-year-old dog. And then the cons were not. So, you kind of weigh up the options so you're feeling like you're being fair. And then interestingly, as we went through, essentially on the sort of the pros thing was just that he was a loved, loyal family member of 13 years versus the cons, which were much longer. But when you weighted them all up, that still outweighed all the cons. So we had to sort of review that, and it was another 6 months before we reviewed that, before the pros of that lovable 13-year-old dog was not weighted above the cons, because the cons had got that much higher, more frequent, more problematic, and therefore more weighted in favours. And it's an awful decision to have to make, to put a beloved animal to sleep, but it became the right one once we felt like we were doing the right thing. So picking the right options, and on here you'll see there's an example. So should I replace my old car with a new one? And it works through the example, and it gives you a scoring to how to score those particular issues. And then you can actually, add them up as you would any kind of mathematical sum, and see that the decision is there. Now you'll obviously have to decide on the criteria. But again, if you're thinking of something as expensive as buying a new car, there will be things you can consider. Or, even getting a divorce. It's amazing how many people make that decision because in the last, 6 months or whatever, they're having a really difficult time in their relationship. But the previous 6 years haven't been problematic necessarily. So, we can often make quite rash decisions based on very immediate feelings. And the idea of this process is it actually makes you go through it, consider all the options, and rather than taking the obvious, so, this isn't good now, this is awful, as in with, our family pet, you sort of weigh it up with, okay, it is awful now, but it hasn't always been. This dog has been with us a long time. This has been okay for a long time. So hang on, how quickly are we to just turn it on its head just because it's not great now? Now, obviously, slightly differently with a dog and as a marriage, but arguably, he wasn't going to get any better. But marriages can, and other situations can. So what you have to look at is, what am I trading up? Is this old car, for example, here, versus a new one worth it? What am I gaining? What am I losing? What kind of investment am I making? Because even with a new car, it doesn't necessarily come problem-free. And that applies to relationships too. You might trade in your current partner, but who's to say the next one is going to be any better? Because arguably, once you get over any honeymoon period with somebody, you get into that sort of mundane, monotonous plodding, which can be a grind and a grate on anyone. So again, it's all about looking at what your options are, and the idea of putting them on paper gives you clarity. So when they're in your head, they will spin, they will not make much sense, and you can get emotionally overwhelmed. On paper, they become much more clinical but clear, and you can see and weigh them up. So hopefully that gives you an idea of how you can then process all that. And then again, as I said, what I will do is I will ensure that there is a blank template that you can obviously download and use. Okay, so that was the first approach, and now I'm going to look at a sort of more theoretical approach. Now again, bear in mind that you have to have some kind of clarity of thought when you're making a decision. So this might not suit you in your particular state. The more pragmatic approach of the pros and cons might. But the idea of all of these tools is that you pick and choose, you use a combination of both. Or all of them, and that's the idea. So again, I shall share my screen. So this is called problem solving questions, and again, it's about you having the ability to work these through effectively. You might want to do them with a friend, and this is where my role as a coach came into play, because I could ask these questions and secondary questions and more delving questions. But again, this is one of the things you can potentially do on your own, as long as you're honest with yourself, and that's really important. So, the first one, what is great about this problem? Take some thought. Again, jot down your answers. Don't expect necessarily to do it all on your head, because your head could be full of fluster, and lack that clarity. What is not perfect yet? What am I willing to do to make it the way I want it? What am I willing to no longer do in order to make it the way I want it? How can I enjoy the process while I do what is necessary to make it the way I want it? So if we were looking at, again, the family pet that I mentioned before, also there was lots of things that was great about the problem, because we had a lovely pet, but we also knew what wasn't perfect. Now the willingness was beyond us. It wasn't a case of his medical conditions weren't fixable. So as you can see, we were processing it in a slightly different way, but you can still take the same problem. Again, this is relative to marriages and relationships. We're very good at identifying the problems. We're not necessarily very good at talking about what's good about a relationship. So things that are monotonous are seen as negative. Well, with monotony might become stability, predictability, which can actually be less dramatic and have a sustainable quality to it. So it's a case of really being meticulous about what you're thinking of and what actually is the impact. And ultimately, whatever you decide, there are always consequences to those decisions. So you have to be prepared for those consequences. So, and it says if you have trouble answering any of these questions, use the word could. What could be great about this problem if I wanted it to be? So again, with a relationship, it could be, right, so this is identifying that something is broken, but I still love my partner. I could fix this. What could I be most happy about my life right now? That we have had some good years, good times. Can I recapture those? Where did those go? What happened to them? If I could feel that way, how would that feel? And often what we forget is that our original compatibility with a partner, if it was good from the start, where it hasn't disappeared, we have just forgotten perhaps how to connect. We've got complacent. We are no longer investing time in that relationship. And bear in mind, you can throw that relationship away, but the new one you will have to invest time in because that's inevitable. And you might do it because it's exciting and new and you haven't got that history. But the old adage of the grass is not necessarily greener on the other side, it's always worth bearing in mind. Whatever was imperfect, whatever you weren't prepared to do in this relationship, or indeed your partner wasn't prepared to do, what is that going to look like, in a new relationship? And sometimes connecting, talking, and working through problems is much more pleasurable. So we've talked about enjoying the process. Reconnecting with somebody that you loved dearly enough to perhaps marry or have children with, is sometimes a worthwhile thing to do, as opposed to just letting it get so broken that the only way out is divorce. So again, I'm talking about relationships, dogs, I'm talking about cars. Your problems will be your own. But again, see how the questions can probe and make you start thinking about things. Now, these next questions are called empowering questions. So the idea is that you are connecting with yourself when you're making decisions, because what often, and if you've done the wheel of life, you'll know, is sometimes when you're looking collectively at your life, you can identify lots of problems, lots of issues, lots of things are overwhelming. And often with my clients, they would get the confusion of what was the actual root of the problem. So, for example, they would be unhappy in their job, determined that they needed to change their job. That was definitely the problem. And then as we were talking, it would be actually there was something at home that was making them unhappy, that they were taking into their job, that they no longer found satisfaction there. Or that a shift at work had changed with a manager that just was enough to tip them into the point of thinking, right, I needed to end my job. And that wasn't necessarily the problem, because if they had sat and looked at the process, as we would sit and do, actually, I like the job, I like where it is, I like the money, I like lots of things about it. And these are what the empowering questions do. They make sure that what you're doing is not having that knee-jerk reaction to something immediate that's emotionally triggered your responses. So empowering questions: what am I happy about in my life right now? What about that makes me happy? How does that make me feel? What am I excited about in my life right now? What am I proud of in my life right now? What am I grateful for? What am I enjoying most? What am I committed to in my life? And who do I love? And all those empowering questions make you start looking for the positives. Because more often than not, the headline negatives are easy to spot. We get drummed that, every day we get that drummed into us with the news headlines or the papers. It's all doom and gloom and negative. Well, we're very good at remembering those negatives, but what we need to do is look beneath the surface and really make sure that we've looked at those questions too, to think, yeah, okay, there's some upset, there's some misery, but there are some good points, and I need to put those into the equation too. Daily questions as a balance. I've got a beeping, bear with me. Okay, so we got slightly interrupted then by my timer. but I just wanted to add about some daily questions. So, as a general prompt, what have I given today? In what ways have I been a giver today? We're often looking at people around us to what they are bringing to the party, what they are bringing and giving to us. I've often heard clients say, well, they're making me unhappy. So again, we're passing that responsibility onto other people as opposed to what we can do about ourselves. So what did I learn today? How has today added to the quality of my life? And those kind of questions, again, really make you start thinking about, what is my involvement? Actually, I'm blaming other people for my circumstance, but how much responsibility is mine? Your past does not equal your future. Whatever you look for, you'll find. And I think that's so very true. We often look, and I do a session on hindsight. We often look, retrospectively, we look back and we take all those difficulties and problems and we carry them forward as like they have some impact on our future. They don't have to. We don't have to come from a poor background and go into a poor future. We don't have to come from a rich background and go into a rich future. Your past doesn't necessarily, as much as it's relevant and it makes you who you are, it doesn't necessarily dictate your future. You can do that. But again, it's a lot of it to do with being very honest in the first place. So that will be a sheet, again, I will put on to the YouTube channel. And finally, I will go to the last one. I shall pause it a second, and then I will come up with the final challenge sheet. Just before I go on to the last little tool and technique, I will share my screen again because I've just realised I've got these other little cartoons that I, again, would often use with clients just to really remind them of their thought processes when it came to sort of deciding about people and things, that you really need to think about what you're doing and how emotionally impactful your decisions can be. So this first one is just, I don't have time to worry about the ones who don't like me. I'm too busy loving the ones that do. So decisions about utilising the people in your life that are good, rather than fretting and spending a lot of time and energy on the ones that don't, I think is quite useful to note. Again, another Charlie Brown, because I just found these ones so funny as well as poignant. And this is about Charlie Brown. I'm in sad shape, and he goes to Lucy. Good morning, sir. Sit right down. Fine. I was afraid I might need an appointment. What can you do when you don't fit in? Charlie Brown says. What can you do when life seems to be passing you by? Follow me, Lucy says. I want to show you something. And she takes him to the top of a hill. See the horizon over there? See how big this world is? See how much room there is for everybody. Have you ever seen any other worlds? Lucy says. No. As far as you know, this is the only world there is, right? Right. There are no other worlds for you to live in, right? Right, says Charlie Brown. You were born to live in this world, right? Right. Well, live it then, Lucy says, and then charges him 5 cents. And it's just topical because we often do feel displaced. We often feel like, we're not fitting in, we're not doing as well. But we are meant to recognise that and still plough on, and recognise that sometimes those feelings aren't accurate, that we might feel a bit displaced, but we're not. We're here for a reason. So again, I liked the message. And again, another classic about decision making specifically. So you're going to be proud of me, Lucy, says Charlie. I've decided that this next year is going to be my year of decision. This is a list of things in my life that I'm going to correct. I'm going to be a better person, he says positively. Not me, says Lucy. I'm going to spend this whole year regretting the past. It's the only way, Charlie Brown. I'm going to cry over spilt milk and sigh over lost loves. It's a lot easier. It's too hard to improve. I tried it once. It drove me crazy, Lucy says. Forget the future is my motto. Regret the past. Oh, how I regret the past, Lucy moans. Why did I do this? Why did I do that? Why? I regret it all. Oh, what regrets? What remorse? What anguish? What sigh? And I think that just reminds us how we can focus on the negatives. And looking back actually is not a productive use of our time. Recognizing the events, recognizing where perhaps some decisions were made that weren't ideal, but always remember, and this is where the hindsight session comes in, at the time you made the best decision you could. You made the decision based on the information you had. Now you can look back with hindsight, with 2020, with knowing all the pitfalls and the consequences, and judge it differently. But at the time, it was the correct thing. I know we're doing a lot of this with COVID, for example. A lot of bashing about, well, why were those decisions made? Well, at the time, they were decisions made with information they had, what they thought was the right thing to do. Now we can look back and go, that wasn't the right thing to do, or that was a bad decision. But we are now, years after, and it's easy to look back and be critical. So, I always recommend that, you try and have balance and not dwell too much on your previous decisions. Learn by them and move on. So the last little thing is a little challenge sheet, which again, I will make sure is on the channel so you can use to, again, help with the decision-making process. So I will... bear with me. I'll pause for a second. So this is the final sheet that I mentioned, and this is, if you like, a sort of lighter look at decision making, but clearly just as impactful. So I'll share my screen and I'll show you what I mean. So this challenge sheet is you already know what to do, and often this is the case. So we are deliberating over the options, but we have an instinct that lies deep within that we're kind of ignoring. So clarity of mind comes from having good feelings. When you're in a positive state, you generally know what to do or know that it doesn't particularly matter. But when you're caught up in a low mood, spending all your time imagining the possible negative consequences of making a decision, you will tend to struggle. So think of a decision you would like to make, either inconsequential or significant, and you're going to make this decision in 60 seconds. Take a coin. Option A corresponds to heads and B to tails. Which way do you hope it lands? Flip the coin. How do you feel about the option it has given you? Relieved, excited, disappointed? You will have experienced in that flipping of the coin a physical, visceral response. The way you felt before the coin was flipped and the way you felt afterwards are a fantastic access point to your inner wisdom. And that's that little instinct where you think you know what to do, but you're just wavering. It doesn't matter which way the coin landed, the feeling you have while the coin is in the air and the feeling after it lands will tell you all you need to know. What you decide will never impact your life as much as how you handle the consequences of that decision. E.g., marrying the wrong person is a mistake. Staying married to them for 25 years and being miserable is a bad decision. No matter what you decide, you can almost always change your mind. So there's always choice. There's always a way of altering whatever decision you've made and switching it around. Another thing I used to do with clients was the red and green button. So imagining that as I was sitting on the chair, they've got a green go button and a red stop button, if you like. And then I would present them with their decision, their problem questions, with the idea, are they going to go or are they going to stop? And very much like the coin making, they were very good at going green, red, because they had that inner wisdom. They were just not confident because of all the impact of the complexities of the problems or their current situation. They just didn't feel confident in their inner wisdom, but it was there. So, you can, again, do that as well. So green is for go, red is for stop, and ask yourself these kind of questions. Am I going to continue in this job? Am I going to, exchange this car? Whatever am I going to do? And see whether the green or red button prevails. So hopefully I've given you a plethora of different things to try when it comes to decision making. Be kind to yourself, unlike Charlie Brown and Lucy sometimes. Note that you are going to feel flustered because it was a big decision. It's going to fill your head. Emptying your head can be a really good start. So we've talked about writing things down, putting the pros and cons sheets down, and then hopefully you will have some clarity. But also don't forget that you have inner wisdom and you just need to tap into it sometimes. So good luck with it.